Hey guys, thanks so much for joining Conscious Conversations. I'm Lauren Douglas. I am joined today by Josh Palau, who is the Chief Media and Activation Officer at PhD. Thanks so much for joining us, Josh.
Thank you.
I met you at Brand Safety Summit. I started following you on LinkedIn, and you're a great follow.
Thank you.
So, I don't know. You have a very interesting voice, and I thought I wanted to just ask you a couple questions. So, the first thing is, one of the things you say in your LinkedIn bio is that your job is to simplify complexity. So, I just wanted to get a sense from you of like, what does that mean to you, and how does that weave into your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, so it's there's a part of this conversation where it'll appear I'm being sarcastic, and I might be, but I don't think I am being.
Okay.
I was on this a long time ago. I was on the sales side, agency side, client side, now back to agency side, and in all of those things, the one thread that always stuck through, and it was mainly when I was, again, when you're an agency and you're dealing with clients or on the client side, is like there's so many companies out there that even though they're embracing digital, their leadership is still several generations back.
Totally.
And if I had to explain live stream shopping and why this is so critical and important, I'd literally use the QVC example, and I guarantee you that executive would get it in a second. So
Totally.
I always feel like there's a way in which you talk to your internal stakeholders and your partners just about like, how would you do this if the internet didn't exist? So whether it's, I was talking recently with a client about some work around connected TV and around brand safety.
Yeah.
And it quickly, as we sort of circled in a very productive conversation, it came back to like, well, how would you do this if the internet didn't exist?
Yeah.
And sort of what we sort of landed on was like, there's just some things you can't guarantee in this world of connected TV.
Right.
And so now it becomes, what risk and what are you willing to accept, in terms of your organization. So for me, it's always been about like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How do you make it seem, as how do you bear it down to its, the simplest thing? Like, here's literally what I'm trying to do. And then from there, you can sort of troubleshoot or shoot it down or you're sort of, figure out how to build it up. But if you're not starting at least from the very simple, like, here's all I want to do, right? I just want to do this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where things get a bit more confusing.
Yeah. And from a management perspective, do you do the same thing with your team?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I work with a ton of really smart digital people, so it makes it a lot easier. In prior roles, I've also worked with tons of really smart people. I just think it's the media expertise, which is where my translation. I remember years ago when I was at Razorfish, we had all the J&J search business. Then he wasn't technically the CMO, but he kind of was, and he dragged me to every single meeting. And I kept saying, "Why do you keep bringing me to meetings when like there's this entire team here, and like we've been working with you for a year?" And he said, "Because you explained it to me, and I'm a little bit older, and this is all about search, and this is again going back quite some time." He's like, I just need you to explain it to these folks and how search is kind of like the shelf that we have in a store right now.
Yeah,
totally. And so I think it's benefited clients and people I've worked with in terms of just being able to explain that and use that sort of simple approach of what are you trying to actually do here.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Cool. You mentioned brand safety, so we can go down that path. What is, I know you've been vocal about calling out the industry for lazy practices or entrenched practices. What are some of the things that you would say we really need to stop doing, especially as we're going into this new year? Like, what is an industry that do we need to really focus on stopping?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So, I don't know if it's, and I'm not trying to split hairs. I don't know if it's stopping or just being more mindful of things.
Yeah.
I think when brand safety started to happen, it's always sort of and again going back to what I just said before, the brand safety always existed in the offline world. Like for years, P&G and J&J wouldn't buy certain networks.
Totally.
Not necessarily for the kinds of safety that we see on some of the platforms with the content that's out there, but just in general, like, like our brand values don't align to advertising on Family Guy, and so therefore we're not going to do it. Yeah. So I think brand safety has now sort of grown into, there's clearly some things we do not want our brands associated with because it's just bad, awful content, not from an opinion standpoint, like it's bad things. I was at J&J during our YouTube shutdown, and it was just a lot of like, terrorism videos. Yeah. And of course we don't want anything there. And I think, but what I think has started to happen, and I think it's really like the hardest part for brands, is what falls into this new space of what I would call, and others, not I didn't create the phrase, responsible journalism. And we could spend hours, which I won't, on that whole topic. But what are the things, like what are the topics that whether it's, just to say it, we all know what we're talking about here, whether it's around elections or vaccines or COVID or like anything that's happening right now in the space like where does that line up? Where does that line up to your brands and what you want to be associated with?
Yeah.
And so I think brand safety has now become this bigger thing than just like that's definitely either offensive or not something we want our brand associated with. To now like bleeding into the world of like what's their opinion? Is that factual? Like even if it is factual, is it something that we want to support?
Right.
And I think it makes it a lot harder. And so I think for brands, it's being mindful about where you as a brand and your brand purpose, or not brand purpose, brand values, where they line up with the places that you place your media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, this show is called Conscious Conversations because the idea is how do you consciously invest? How do you responsibly invest? And like, how do you make those decisions? So I think that it totally makes sense to talk to brands and say, what are your brand values? Let's start there.
Right.
And then we can go from there and kind of determine what makes sense to you from a media buying perspective. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. We obviously just are, early stages of 2022. CES was last week. There were a lot of announcements on everything from the metaverse to new technologies that are emerging. Just wanted to kind of get a sense from you of like, is there anything that you saw or that you're excited about as it relates to any of the announcements that came out?
Yeah, I mean, there was a few that caught my eye. I mean, it's funny. I've made some jokes, just about like how the whole metaverse space really shapes out. I think anybody who's been in this industry for a while has seen like some forms of this happen. But I do think the idea of brands trying to find other ways to connect with consumers is something that's always like the next sort of great area to go and dig into. So I'm interested to see in sort of how brands adopt it. And then also what that consumer uptake is to it, because I think that's always the thing with I think anything that ever gets launched in our space is pretty much it seems like a great idea, but then what happens when consumers it goes in the wild and consumers have to actually interact with it and use it. And so will
Totally.
people love the idea of creating this experience and buying things in that way? Yes. Or will they want to still go back to the ways that they were doing it in the past? So I think that was one really interesting one, and then a lot of the stuff just around like automation. Whether it was in the auto space, there was some great stuff coming out of like the video space in terms of smart TVs and like data and targeting for CTV advertising. So I think all of those are really starting to push good boundaries.
Cool. I guess back to the metaverse for a second, just to dig in there. Like there were a lot of brands that are seemingly super interested. I know Nike has expressed interest amongst others. Like, what does that theoretical activation look like? What is the future experience of a brand within the metaverse? Or is that just something we'll have to see as it comes?
Well, I mean, so I don't think it's. Well, yes. The quickest answer is sure. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Though I do think the brands that are starting to get involved there are thoughtful about like what it could look like. I think it's way beyond, and I know this is probably something other people have said. I think it's way beyond Second Life and what that was. And so I do think there's also a generational piece of people who I wouldn't even, when I say generational, I'm not even talking about specific age groups, but there's a whole commodity now of having things online, or a whole group of people, I should say, that are interested in buying, whether it's an NFT, whether it's taking part in the metaverse, whether it's gaming, like having this virtual life. And so I think it differs for, if you take like a healthcare client, is it how do I deliver like health and wellness, or I take that teledoc visit that actually was quite successful or I guess we're still in the pandemic,
right?
Like, as part of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But how do I make it even better? And how do I make the patient experience better? Or if you go to the retail side, it's how do I use it for actual shopping, whether it's the live stream type shopping, or it's actually you're buying things that will live in the virtual world. So I think each brand is going to figure out where it fits. I think from my just experience with being on the brand side, it's got to fit with what you can do as a brand and what your audience is interested in. So
Totally.
my warning to brands would be to stay away from the places that you're not. It's that playing in spaces that you really don't have a right to play in.
Right, totally. And that seems sort of like inauthentic, right? Like all of a sudden you're like wrapping your neck in your whatever scarf of, and maybe that'll work because like in the NFT space, we've seen that like the purple hat on the guy is more valuable than the red hat on the guy. And so maybe that will be sort of, important in the future, but it is funny to think about like, well, let's sort of walk into this slowly because otherwise you don't want it to be an inauthentic experience or inauthentic to the brand, as you said. Yeah, cool. I guess any everyone's sort of in the land right now of predictions and what's going to happen this year. And, not to beat a dead horse on predictions, but is there anything you're excited for this year?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't have a prediction. I have a few of things that I would say are probably more important for important for clients to figure out, brands to figure out, but also just interesting in terms of the impact on the consumers. And so I think I start with, I kind of mentioned it a second ago, this whole sort of live stream shopping.
Yeah.
I think that was a prime space to be sort of navigated through even before pandemic. But I think now what we're seeing is it's sort of got a nice place front and center. There's lots of companies doing really interesting space there. I am someone who believes this is just the next version of QVC. And it's sort of like the old is new again. You're watching on a screen, you're clicking a button versus, my dad used to call and have to actually place the order. But I think the way in which they're using those shopping experiences, and that sort of bleeds into the world of creative and how some companies are using those really like shoppable assets to really just, I guess it's all around like how do you ease the friction from sort of consideration to purchase in a way that's interesting to consumers, that's immersive, that makes them want to actually engage in it. So I think that's one big giant space. I think connected TV. There's it's not my joke. I think it's a running joke of just like we now, if you have Roku, if you have a smart TV, if you have a Fire Stick, you've got 18 different channels now, which kind of feels like cable.
Right. It totally does.
And so we're back to having a cable box.
Right.
And so, and so I think the proliferation of all of the streaming platforms is going to create, in good ways, more inventory opportunities for marketers.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of content, is how much content do people want? And, when you start to add up all of these things, this whole movement of like cutting the cord has gone from, cutting the cord to now once you do some level of like keeping your internet, but then adding all these streaming platforms,
right.
It's more about, I don't care about the cord anymore, the cost, I care about just the entertainment piece.
Yeah.
And so I think the impact from our consumers is what are you looking to get out of all of these platforms? And really for marketers and for these networks, like what experiences are you helping deliver? Because linear inventory is down. And we're not going to see the same numbers that we've ever seen before. Yeah. And as more consumption happens on these other devices and other platforms, where are these folks stepping up and saying, here's the unique opportunities that we're offering marketers to reach that consumer?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, obviously with the move to more streaming versus linear, you lose ad inventory opportunities, right? I mean, there's only so many ad supported streaming platforms out there. So how do marketers navigate that? Is there more product placement opportunity, or as you said, live streaming, live shopping? I've seen some really cool things with QR codes on the screen, because obviously everyone's watching their phone at the same time they're watching their TV. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's almost like all of our devices are merging, as well as all of the apps and things within the devices as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit also of a reset in some ways. Like you're seeing some of the some of the networks or the platforms are getting really smart about the use of that inventory. So if it's like when I use Peacock and I hit the pause button, like it doesn't just pause; it pauses with an ad. It's a static ad, but it's an ad nonetheless.
Totally.
And then there are platforms like I'm watching, you confused me earlier, we were talking about Mayor of Kingstown, not Mayor of Easton. Though, no, you were right the first time. That is closer to where I live. But I'm watching it, and I'm watching it on Paramount Plus, and I'm sitting through the ads that are there because they're there, and that's the way I have my Paramount set up. Whereas if I was recording it somewhere else, I probably wouldn't. And so I think there's this sort of like, accepting of some of these now changes in the space to say, I'll sit through this because it's the content I want. Totally. Versus I'll just record it all and just fast forward as I go.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to the social shopping thing for 1 second, there's a company in China, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they are essentially like, you could bring your friends together and social shop together, and then you get discounts based on the number of people. Which I saw that at CES, and I thought, like, that's fascinating. Imagine porting that over to the US model where you're like, yeah, like me and my 20 friends are really valuable consumers. Here's the subgroups we're going to be creating, and here's the influence that we could potentially have with brands. So I thought that was an interesting concept in the East.
Yeah. I mean, once again, it's like what's old is new. So it's basically you and your friends at the mall.
Totally.
In the 90s.
Totally.
We're back to those things. All those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. what do you think we need to start doing as an industry?
That's a good one. I think. Well, I think I think the day of the cookie's definitely going to happen sometime in the next.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how many.
So you're
years.
telling me we're not going to be sitting here in 12 months having the same conversation about cookies?
We might. I mean, there's a really good chance we might.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I do think I think there's I think there's a few things in this space, which is a really good question. I do think it is time to, and there are brands that are doing this, but when Google made its announcement to push everything back, I think some brands were like, whew. And I think some brands, though, were like, took that deep sigh of relief, but also said, okay, so now we have time to figure this out.
Sure.
And I think that those brands, I think, but I worry that there's still a lot of brands that aren't working to figure this thing out. Mm-hmm. And that, not that they know it's not going to happen, but they're just like, okay, we've pushed that down the road a little bit, whether like, you're hitting, because part of solving that is testing you in different platforms.
Yeah.
So I think that you know, depending on your budgets, your business performance, the industry and category you're in, you might not have that flexibility. But I think that marketers have to get really focused on what is going to be that solve for identity, and then how do they set it up in a way that also, and it sort of crashes into some stuff that NBC announced this week. Like, how do we also set it up in a way that it's not another walled garden? And I'm not saying NBC was setting up a walled garden, but their announcement about their unified platform with all these different data points, it's great. And I know a lot of the people who worked on it. I think it's a question for brands, like, what is going to be your data strategy around audiences that's not going to have you seeing, you know, 7 different Laurens in all these different places?
Totally.
Is it going to be focused on clean rooms? Is it going to be focusing on a small group of partners? You know, do we, and this is something I think the industry has to sort of take a look at, like, do we accept that, look, there is going to be some waste and there is going to be some overlap and there is going to be some viewability because nothing's ever perfect. Because for the amount of time that I've spent in this space, like, we spend a lot of time trying to get to a really defined answer. Yeah. And we never get there because life never gets there.
Yeah.
And so
it kind of goes back to your earlier point. Like, in traditional, 20 years ago, we didn't necessarily have the same, you couldn't necessarily say that the Lauren that was watching the show on Wednesday night was the same Lauren or a different Lauren than watching the show on Thursday night. So we've never had a perfect solution. No,
and I would even say, and I know fragmentation. I know this is where I've gone to the other side of the age category.
Yeah.
And now I'm old, and so I'm not saying that there's not tremendous strides to be made. What I would say is just having that historical perspective is we've built some pretty, and as an industry, like, we've built some pretty amazing brands. Yeah. Using some media formats that were less trackable and less measurable than what we have at our disposal today. So my point is more that we can do this, right? Yeah. And we can do this in a way that gives us, what's the middle ground from, like, I want to see every moment that Lauren is taking in her day and definitely like separate her from somebody else in her household to, like, well, we think we have someone that kind of looks like Lauren and she bought these pants and, like, okay, like, we feel good about that. Now let's target her with a bunch of pants ads. Like, I think that's kind of where things, where you sort of have to wrestle what that middle ground looks like.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, is there, because I'm sure you're having these conversations with the brands that you're working with every day, is there a playbook that you recommend to them, or is it really just specific to your brand, your category, and what data you have access to?
I think, well, it does sort of get, I mean, it does start with what kind of data you have to a certain extent. Because if you have nothing, then it is hard. I mean, I've worked in consumer health where, for a lot of my career, where you don't want a tremendous relationship with your mouthwash or your pain reliever. You want the coupon, you want maybe a tip on, like, how this doesn't interact with another drug, but that's about it. Versus I worked at Comcast, and I dare say, well, you were forced into a relationship because that's how I pay my bill. That's how I see what my services are. That's how I get my service call. But you also want to know, like, well, what do I get with my subscription? Wait, what free videos are out there? And going back to our earlier part, like, oh wait, Netflix is actually integrated into my box now. Like, how do I do that? So like, there's places that you want to have some communication with, and some that you just don't. And so I think it does start with the data piece. But then I think from there, it is a maybe not so much a playbook, but it is more of like a buying framework around, what are those end goals that you'll look back and say, hey, we're successful by doing these things, and then how do I actually, like, get to those goals based on what I have at my disposal? So can we be a little bit looser with measurement? Do we have to, maybe we should just be focused on, like, big awareness campaigns because we just need to sell as much of X product as much as we can, versus other categories that are about compliance or about repeat usage. again, not to spend too much time on COVID, but I mean, there's so many industries that are now like trying to figure out like how do I even operate in this world? You know, when people aren't even consuming my product because of COVID. So I think there's a lot that has to be sort of worked through in that.
Totally. Cool. All right, I have a couple quick questions for you, like lightning rounds.
Oh, good.
What's your favorite ad you've seen in the last 12 months?
Oh gosh. I'm a big Nike person, so I don't know, and so I mean, so something in the Nike world. There was also something that I saw the NFL actually did. I believe it was the NFL did a partnership with this with this place called the Trevor Project, which does a lot of stuff for LGBTQ plus community, and like I thought that was a really good. I want to say it was them, and now I feel bad if I give the NFL credit for something it doesn't deserve. But I thought it was a good collaboration there. Yeah. I mean, for me and Nike, I like a lot of what they're doing, especially around. I have two daughters. One played sports, one does music, and but I always like what they've done around female athletes and bringing them more to the forefront. And I'm seeing a lot more of that now. Cool. So I think that probably I don't have one specific spot, but I would say that one is there. I'd say the spot that makes me laugh the most is all the ads about when you're becoming your parents.
Oh my gosh!
And it's like I definitely said one or two of those things. Not everything.
Same. Oh my god!
But I've definitely said a few of those. We have a lot of pillows. There's a few gather signs in our house. So it kind of hits home.
Yeah, totally. I love it. What is your favorite platform or channel to buy on? Like, if you started your own company tomorrow, where would you buy?
Like by media or by?
By media.
Oh, so this is like the views and opinions expressed by Josh Palau are just mine.
Totally.
This
is Josh's sneaker company.
Yes, this is the gaggle of lawyers that will get mad at me if I say the wrong thing here. But if I had to, I love all my children. But I was always been a big fan of the Trade Desk. Frankly, it's where I had the most interaction and success when I was at Bayer. For me, it was how they bridged what they were doing in the programmatic space with what they were doing in TV. And they were kind of at the early stages of that. So to me, that's probably where I would start with. I'm not a fan of multiple platforms. So I know where there's a reason why you want to use a couple more than one. But I do think like if you had to pick one to get the most out of, that's usually where my default lean goes to.
Cool. I wonder, I was thinking like if I were to advise like a small, I don't know, women's lip gloss company, I feel like for me it would be Instagram, just because like where else can you have such a visual medium to like show your lip gloss? But I guess.
If you're talking, so I maybe misunderstood the question. Like I think that's purely from like the running of the back end. If you're talking platforms themselves, I mean, I really actually think that TikTok has a lot more to it than people give it credit for.
Totally.
But by the way, I do think they get a ton of credit. So I think there's still the ad product's still being built out. The targeting capabilities are still they're still getting there as they should because they're still new. I think that's where I would go because what I love about what they do there, and they're very open about saying it, is like don't make ads, make TikToks.
Yeah. And
so it's just make what you would want to watch, but just put your product in it. And I found that there are some brands that do it really well, and I found there are some brands that are just saying, you know what, I want to be here, and I'm going to put my ad here. And by the way, I don't think that's a bad idea. If the idea is let's not do anything until I can figure this out, that's a bad idea. Yeah. So I'm okay if you put a less than fit for a platform ad up on TikTok. Totally. But if it was Josh's sneakers, I would start there.
Yeah. So I love TikTok too, and I think like it is interesting. Like I love the produced ads, like the beautiful produced ads on TikTok, and then I also sometimes stop at the ads that are like TikToks, and like you said, don't make ads, make TikToks. I think those are fun. If you had to explain to your grandmother what your job is, how would you?
Or mother, either one.
Or your mother, right?
So it was actually, it used to be a lot easier when I was really just focused on search. Because it was just like, you do this and I do that. When that thing shows up, like I made that happen. I think now I guess I would say this, like it's a little bit easier to define in the world I'm in now, which is just, we work with, pick a client and I name one. I have to name one that my mom would actually know. And then like when you see their ads, like we're responsible for helping them put that there and then figure out how they're actually measuring it. So it's gotten easier to explain.
Yeah.
But when you start getting into the language we use, I think that's when I lose her.
Yeah, totally, totally. Cool. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
I think the big thing right now is it's crazy to say after doing this for so long that like there are still things changing in this industry, and it's not that I'm naive about things changing. It's
Yeah.
just that I mean so much has changed over the last couple of years, and yeah, a portion of it has changed as a result of the pandemic, but a lot of it hasn't. Like a lot of these things that have been out there, like these things have existed. Yes, some have been accelerated. Some have just had more utility. But there's a bunch of stuff that just is starting to just blow up because they're just good technologies. And so I encourage brands to try to spread a little bit of money into those pilot pools. It's
Yeah.
always the thing that gets cut first.
Totally.
Find a way to test into some of these things. Find a way to take something on that you wouldn't normally take on, just to get learnings out of it. Because I
Yeah.
think right now there still is a full-on duopoly with Amazon sort of coming in like as well on that one, and I don't think we really completely ever get away with that. I do think though, as privacy and data and all of the things that are coming, becoming bigger and bigger things, and as a new generation of consumers enters the marketplace, like there's just other places they're gonna go. And
Yeah.
so I don't think I don't think you're wrong about sticking with Facebook and Google for the majority of your spend.
Right.
I just don't think that it's the only way to get to where you're going.
Yeah,
And so,
totally.
but that requires a little more diversification. So I would really, tell people like get back into diversifying your investments and look at places that a couple of years ago weren't as interesting, like contextual. Like I think contextual's changed a ton over just the last,
Totally.
12 to 18 months.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's a place that, probably has some great opportunities. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably my biggest piece of advice for people.
Cool. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me. This is great.
Thanks to all of you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.